The Millionaire and the Black Beggar. It was supposed to be the biggest day of the year at Hawthorne University. The kind of graduation ceremony people would talk about for decades. Gold tassels swinging, proud families in the sunlit stands, speakers dropping punchy lines. But no one expected the storm that would crash down in the middle of it all. They called him the Black Beggar. A cruel, sharp jab from a man who looked more like a king than a man. The Billionaire. Carson Langford. Tall, silver-haired, eyes cold and calculating, standing with his polished security guards in their dark suits like predators waiting to pounce. It was more than just a slur. It was venom, the kind that burns deep, makes chests tighten and breaths hitch. The crowd was stunned. Over there, George Kellen, the black veteran who served with honor, had just crossed the stage moments ago, sweat still clinging to his brow from grief and pride. His uniform folded underneath his gown, a silent vow tee. A man who fought for this country, now fighting for dignity on its proudest stage. 6 other men were nearby, 6 brothers from another life, former Navy SEALs, all of them draped in their own gowns but carrying the weight of dark memories in their eyes. The kind of friendship forged in fire and fear. They had laughed, hugged, and wiped away tears just minutes before. But now the scene twisted. Langford's words sliced through the applause. The security team moved forward, jaws clenched, shadows lengthening around George like a trap. "Hey," muttered Marcus, the tallest SEAL, his fists curled, knuckles white. "Not on our watch." The other 5 stiffened. A crackle of tension filled the air. The flip of a switch inside them. Years of war flashed in their minds. The heat of gunfire. The bite of loss. All that training told them one thing right now: protect your own. Whispers bubbled in the crowd. Some faces burned red with anger. Others looked away, unsure. Kids clutching diplomas froze mid-step. Cameras clicked, capturing a moment nobody would forget. George stood rooted, hands trembling. The harsh words thudded inside his chest like bullets. He wanted to speak, to fight back, but something deeper gnawed at him. The question of worthiness. Did this world see him as a hero or just a shadow? Suddenly, another voice cut through the tension. Not from George or the SEALs, but from a soft-spoken woman who'd been watching from the sidelines. "You don't know him!" A hush fell. Even Langford's smile faltered. The 6 friends looked at each other, faces grim. They weren't just fighting a bully. They were about to unearth secrets, dark scars buried under wealth and power. Secrets that could change everything. What truth hid behind Carson Langford's cold eyes? How far would these veterans go to protect one of their own? And would this fight heal old wounds or rip them wide open? The air crackled. The crowd held its breath. The story was far from over. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube removed their subscriptions without notice. Take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any exclusive content that's coming. And since you're here, drop a powerful like that really helps me with the algorithm. Oh, and let me know in the comments, what city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. The hush lingered, heavy, as if the sky itself held its breath. George's heart raced, pounding inside his chest like a caged bird desperate to break free. The crowd felt like a tidal wave, uncertainty swirling among them. The woman who had spoken, her kind eyes glowing, stood there, steady despite the tempest brewing around them. "Who are you?" Langford's voice dripped with disdain. Flicker of doubt passed across his face, like a shadow crossing the sun. "I'm Nina," she said, voice steady. "And I know him. I know George. Not just as a veteran, but as a man who survived things you can't even imagine." The crowd leaned in, a collective gasp escaping their lips. People adjusted in their seats. The rumors flickered like a candle in the wind. Who was this woman? Marcus stepped forward, furious, fists tight as he spat out. "You should know better than to defend scum." "Scum?" Nina replied, her eyes narrowing. "That's the problem. You don't know what kind of sacrifice you're talking about. None of you do." More whispers swept through the audience, eyes darting between George and Langford. But before Marcus could respond, the ground shook. A loud crack sounded from above. The crowd looked up, stunned. A bolt of lightning split the sky, illuminating Langford's face in a violent flash. Gasps echoed as a shockwave of wind swept across the sweeping lawn. Then, without warning, a figure stumbled off the bleachers. It was a man in a tattered suit, face twisted in pain. "Help!" he screamed, voice raw, stumbling forward, a riptide of desperation unspooling in the middle of the ceremony. "You have to hear me! You don't know what he's done!" Everyone froze, eyes widened. Was it a joke? Or was this man serious? Langford's face paled from its usual sternness. "Get him out of here!" he barked, yet fear flickered behind his cold facade. But chaos erupted. People surged forward. The man, trembling, pointed at Langford with shaking fingers. "He's hiding everything. Secrets about the lives he ruined. People." The crowd gasped collectively, breaths hitching. George's fists unclenched, confusion mingling with the fire in his chest. What was happening? Nina stepped forward, urging clarity. "What do you mean?" "Don't trust him," the man shouted, voice hoarse. "The stories, they go beyond money. He sold us out. Left soldiers to die. He's a monster in a suit." Gasps ripped through the crowd. Shock gripped the air like a vice. In that instant, the reality shifted. George felt a knot tighten in his throat, panic rising. The man's wild words blasted open a new world of doubts. Was it true? Was Langford not just untouchable wealth, but something darker? Langford's security moved to drag the man away. But he broke free, eyes wild and pleading. "You have to listen. The truth is buried. He can't keep it hidden forever." Suddenly, a startling siren pierced through the murmurs, echoing ominously. The stillness shivered, and the tension snapped like a drawn bow. As sirens wailed closer, the crowd erupted into chaos. People shouting, families clutching their diplomas as they fled. A split second, suspended in time, everything twisted and balled into uncertainty. As George stood amidst the storm, everything he thought he knew crumbled. "Stay back," Langford shouted, desperation seeping into his voice. Where was truth? Where was loyalty? Whoa! George's heart raced with a whirlwind of questions. Would revealing these secrets destroy the man he'd fought to understand? Or would it uncover something that could change everything for him and his brothers? The scene erupted around him. Lights flashed, and the world spun into a chaotic symphony of confusion and urgency. George took a step back, breathless. The echoes of shattered illusion clung to the air like smoke, and as he looked at Langford, the richest man in the world, suddenly seemed like an unfinished puzzle. But the answer was still hidden, lost in a tangled web of lies. And George knew, as the storm loomed heavier overhead, that this wasn't just about him anymore. The whispers hung in the air, thick and electric. The woman's voice cut through the crowd, but George's heart raced for another reason. As he opened his mouth to respond, the ground beneath him shifted. A shout broke the tension, jarring everyone back to reality. "Get down!" yelled Marcus, eyes wide with horror. In an instant, chaos erupted. A heavy thud, a muffled explosion, screams erupted from the back of the stands, and a surge of panic washed over the audience. People ducked, heads scrambled to find cover. George's mind went blank. The moment stretched. Time felt suspended, like a cruel trick of silence. The crowd swayed like a wave, every face painted with fear. Then a flash, a blinding light erupted. It struck the stage, engulfing Carson Langford in a burst of smoke and chaos. Gasps erupted, and George felt his breaths quicken. He stumbled backward, eyes fixated on the scene. Was that blood? Langford, the billionaire who had just belittled him, now lay on the ground, shrouded in confusion and agony. But the stunned disbelief that washed over George flickered out when he caught a glimpse of the woman who spoke. She wasn't just a bystander. She made her way toward Langford, a determined gaze locked on his frantic expression. Suddenly, the air chilled. It wasn't just the shock of the explosion. It was a realization. "Get back!" shouted Marcus, pushing George behind him, ready to protect his friend. "No!" George gasped. But it was too late. The woman knelt beside Langford, digging into her handbag with frantic hands. She pulled out a sleek, metallic object, glinting ominously in the sunlight. A gun? The world spun around George as clarity broke through the shock. "What are you doing?" The question slipped from his lips, choking him. The seals tensed, preparing to pounce. "Stop!" Marcus shouted. "Get away from him!" "Please," the woman muttered, her voice trembling. But it wasn't fear. There was an urgency in her eyes. "I have to!" And then she did something that shattered everything. She spun around, training the weapon on the heart of the crowd. Chaos erupted again. People screamed and scattered in every direction. "You don't understand!" Her voice cut through the panic. "He's the one who—" But she didn't finish. In that heartbeat, a loud crack shattered the air, and silence followed it. Even the screams faded, replaced by a deafening void. George's heart pounded. He couldn't breathe. He looked at Langford. Was he okay? Then it hit him. Memories flickered. The news stories, whispers among the ranks. Secrets that followed this man like shadows. Questions flooded his mind. Had he really fought for a country that stood behind villains? Had he stood on this stage with a man who was part of a darker story? The weight of Every decision, every moment in war cloaked over him. The woman fell to her knees, dropping the gun. Jointed sobs slipped through the cracks of her tough exterior. And George, he felt everything pivot. A single truth snarled in the chaos. Who was the real monster here? The crowd held its breath, eyes locked. Shock hung thick in the air. The story wasn't just about George or Langford anymore. It ran deeper, intertwining like roots beneath a stormy soil. What would happen next? What would it all mean? In that moment, time didn't stand still. It blurred, and the day, once bright with promise, now hung on the brink of devastation. Did they just stumble into something far greater than themselves? The silence echoed louder than the chaos. Uncertainty followed. The weight of truth, dark and heavy. Where would this lead? All they could do was wait for the storm to break. The silence hung heavy, an invisible weight pressing down. George stood, heart pounding, eyes darting between the fallen woman and Langford, who lay crumpled under the stage lights. She was gasping, shaking, overcome with emotion. The crowd, once a sea of faces, had become a swarm of whispers and shouts. Panic spread like wildfire. But then, amidst the chaos, something shifted. A low growl rumbled from the back of the stands. It wasn't a voice, but a sound that made flesh crawl. George turned, squinting against the bright light. A man stepped forward, tall and broad, moving through the audience with a purpose. Clad in a dark, long coat, he exuded power, the unsettling kind. Gasps erupted as he drew closer, eyes fixed on the woman. In his hand he held an unfamiliar device, a sleek, black rectangle flashing ominously under the sunlight. George's chest tightened. The crowd recoiled, faces screaming but voiceless, confusion washing over them. "Not her," the man said, voice low and menacing. "You don't know what you've done." "Whoa, what does that mean?" George shouted, gripping Marcus's arm beside him. The seal looked ready to pounce, a silent protectiveness surging through him. The woman on the ground looked up, her eyes swimming with fear. "No, you can't," she stammered. The man didn't flinch. He raised the device, pointing it at her. "You've exposed our plan. You've put everything at risk." George felt the ground shift under him, the churning uncertainty. What plan? What risk? The whispers of the crowd turned into a tidal wave of confusion. "Who are you?" George found himself asking, but it felt like a scream lost in the void. "Your hero." The man's smile was icy, devoid of warmth. "Loyalty means everything, but she's a liability, and now she's a target." Before anyone could react, he pressed a button. A high-pitched squeal echoed across the lawn, a sound that made skin prickle, eyes bleed. The crowd convulsed, screams rising over the sound, panicking, desperate. People dove for safety, confusion erupting into frantic chaos. George clutched his head. Instinct kicked in. He lunged for the woman. "Get down!" he shouted, pulling her behind a row of seats. Marcus followed, eyes narrowed, assessing threats. But then the impossible happened. An explosion of images, flashes of memories, flooded George's mind. Scenes he'd fought to bury. The war, the choices, the sacrifices. They mingled with the faces of friends lost, cries echoing in his ears. And within that chaos, Words emerged, sharp and biting. "George, you don't know him. You trust him for the wrong reasons." "What are you talking about?" "Dot!" His thoughts splintered as he attempted to focus. "Everything you believe," she cried, eyes boring into his. "Langford isn't a king. He's selling you a lie. Our fight was never about honor. It was about something darker." "What?" But before she could answer, a shudder ran through the ground, an unearthly rumble, followed by a blinding flash of light. A second explosion echoed, a deafening roar. The billionaire, still on the ground, writhed, eyes wide with dread. George wanted to scream, to run, to breathe. The chaotic backdrop of noise faded into an unholy silence. And then it hit him. A reality-shattering truth. The man was coming for George, sprinting with purpose. You think you fought? You have no idea what lies ahead. With a tumbling crash, everything fell apart. The edges of his vision blurred, and then the world turned on its side. George grasped for clarity, but found only shadows. Memories slamming together, whispering secrets he never knew. As the dust settled and confusion enclosed him like a fog, a single question hung in the air. Who were they really fighting for? And suddenly, in the wake of chaos, George feared he had stumbled into a deeper web than he could ever comprehend. The silence hung in the air like a heavy fog. George's heart raced. The woman's voice had pierced through the chaos, but her words only stirred deeper questions. Who was she? Why did she speak up at this moment? "Who do you think you are?" Langford shot back, his voice dripping with disdain. His security team shifted closer, but Marcus and the other SEALs halved the distance between them and George. They stood shoulder to shoulder, brothers in defiance. Before anyone could respond, the woman stepped forward. The crowd parted, confused murmurs rippling around her as she revealed herself. Mary Kellen, George's estranged sister. Her face was pale, eyes wide, with an intensity that caught everyone off guard. "Enough of this!" she yelled, causing heads to turn. Gasps echoed in the audience, the reactions spreading like wildfire. "You don't know him, and you never cared to. You only see the colors and not the man who wears them." George's breath caught. Mary? Here? They hadn't spoken in years, not since she had chosen a life away from their family struggles, running to a different city, a different life. The family split apart, torn by grief and choices, and now here she was, at the center of the storm. Langford stared, shocked. The crowd shifted restlessly, excitement bubbling beneath their disbelief. The SEALs exchanged glances, caution tightening their stomachs. "Mary, stay back," George whispered, but she didn't move. The warmth of their past swirled like a gentle gust in the chill of confrontation. "Look around," Mary cried. "This is your day, George. This is your moment, and he thinks he can tarnish it with ignorance." "He has no right." Langford's arrogance faltered. For just a second, his cool facade cracked. "You're just a nobody, Mary. You always were." The venom dripped from his lips, sharper than before. The atmosphere shifted. Anger danced through the crowd, igniting a fire. George's heart pounded louder. He saw his sister's hand trembling, her dignity on shaky ground, but still standing tall. Then, without warning, the unexpected happened. A low rumble rolled through the sky, and suddenly, a series of explosions erupted from the nearby parking lot. Panic erupted. People screamed, and chaos spilled into the air like thick smoke. Amidst the confusion, Mary's face drained of color. "No, it can't be," she breathed, eyes widening in horror. The explosions had not just been a terrifying coincidence. They were part of a carefully orchestrated attack. In moments, security officers began shouting, directing people to safety. The SEALs shifted into action, instincts kicking in. They formed a protective barrier around George and Mary, scanning the chaos for threats, adrenaline surging through them. George looked at Mary, confusion twisting into fear. "Did you know? Is this connected to you?" he asked, desperation creeping in. Mary's eyes filled with tears. I swear I didn't. But I know who did. Someone wants revenge on both of us." Questions bounced in George's mind, colliding with the tension around him. Should they trust her? Was this about their past, or something bigger? Had everything Langford said been a distraction from a much darker truth? In the shadows, Langford's cold smile returned, watching the scene unfold, knowing more than he let on. The audience was gripped by fear, fluttering between disbelief and panic, faces blurring in George's vision. The crowd surged, the ceremony lost in the confusion. It was no longer a celebration. It was chaos. And in that turmoil, everything shifted. What connections tied Mary to the chaos? What secrets lay buried in their pasts? The sirens began to wail, and George felt a knot in his stomach. This was only the beginning. What else would unravel in the storm? The hush lingered, a heavy blanket draping over the crowd as the woman's voice hung in the air. Langford's smirk slipped, eyes narrowing, scanning her for a hint of weakness. But something exchanged between George and his brothers, a spark igniting. Marcus took a step forward, fists still clenched, ready to confront their towering enemy. But before anger could boil over, the ground trembled beneath them. A sudden rumble, low and menacing, shifted the atmosphere. The crowd gasped collectively. Cameras turned off Langford, frantic faces searching for the source of the noise. Just then, a blinding flash lit the sky. It was too low, too loud. The earth shook again, more fiercely this time. The sound was wrong. Like thunder, raw and unrelenting. People clutched their seats, faces pale. And then it came, the scream of twisted metal, ripping through the air. A section of the grand stage buckled and caved in, taking with it the podium under Langford's feet. He stumbled, eyes wide, a moment of disbelief flashing in his expression, before he vanished from sight, swallowed by a cloud of dust and chaos. In an instant, pandemonium erupted. The crowd surged back, students and families stumbling over one another, fear etching lines on their faces. George's heart raced. Someone had to act. He looked to his brothers, adrenaline coursing through them, fierce pride battling the shock. "Get down! Move!" shouted Marcus, his voice cutting through the noise. The SEALs sprang into action, instincts honed from years of training igniting within them. They started ushering people away from the crumbling stage, but all eyes were glued to the center of the disaster. where the dust began to settle. Then, from the thick haze, a silhouette emerged. It was Langford, staggering, blood trickling from a cut above his brow, shock painted across his face. But as he steadied himself, something shifted in his demeanor. His own arrogance morphed into desperate fury, glancing wildly around him, as if seeking something or someone. "Where is she?" he screamed, his voice raw, piercing through the murmurs of frightened families. Every head turned toward him, confusion wrapping around them like a cloak. "Who are you talking about?" someone shouted from the crowd, trembling hands still covering mouths. The woman who dares!" Langford bellowed, his breath ragged. "You think you can expose me? You think your truth can crush my empire?" The crowd faltered, then murmurs boiled into a wild roar. Gasps swept through. George's heart sank. We weren't just witnessing a public confrontation. We were standing at the edge of revelation. "I know you're here. I know what you did," Langford shouted, eyes wild, hunting. Then, as if summoned from the storm, the woman, the soft-spoken voice from a moment ago, stepped forward, shaking as she held the gaze of the billionaire. In that heartbeat, the air thickened with silence. "What did you say?" she asked, calm yet trembling, her eyes locked onto his fiercely. A sense of realization washed over the crowd, a wave feeling like the ground was pulling away from their feet. The connection began to surface. Whispers turned to questions. Suddenly, it wasn't just George's fight for dignity. It was a battle cloaked in deeper, darker secrets. What truth lay between them? What blood was spilled in silence? The crowd held its breath again, teetering on the edge of understanding. Who was this woman? And what had Carson Langford really done? The shadow of war between them had become personal, exposing vulnerabilities once buried beneath layers of power and pride. And as George stared at the shifting scene, instincts flaring, he caught a shimmer of recognition in Langford's eyes, a flicker of fear, rarely seen in a man who thought he owned the world. The ground shook again, but it was nothing compared to the earthquake of emotions about to erupt. All was about to change, and none would emerge unscathed. The air crackled. The crowd held its breath. "You don't know him." The woman stepped forward, her voice trembling yet steady. She took deep breaths, the tension in the air tightening around her like a noose. Faces turned toward her, curiosity mixed with disbelief. "Keep your mouth shut, lady," Langford snapped, his smile now a thin line of irritation. Bradley, one of George's old comrades, muttered, "What is she doing?" But George felt a sudden grip of hope. Who was this woman? Did she see him? Did she know his worth? "Carson Langford doesn't define dignity," she said, her voice stronger now. "You don't understand what you're talking about." Gasps floated through the stands. Children shifted in their seats. Cameras clicked on, the world outside this bubble snapping to attention. "Who are you?" Langford's voice dripped with disdain, and the shadows of his guards loomed larger. "I'm Charlotte Avery, someone who knows the truth," she declared, stepping closer. The veterans shared wary glances. They felt something stirring. Was there a fight to be had? Or was it time to retreat? But then, Charlotte's gaze locked with George's. It was piercing, a connection threading through the crowded arena. You know what's hidden, George," she said, her voice now a whisper. "You can break the silence." George felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. Silence? What silence? He wasn't a coward, but this wasn't the place for battles of words. Not today. Not on this stage. "Enough of this nonsense!" Langford snarled, his lips curled into a mocking smile. "You think your words hold weight? I'm untouchable!" In that moment, the ground shuddered. A sudden roar echoed through the stands, deep, thunderous. People gasped, fear flashing in their eyes. Then it happened. A loud explosion tore through the stadium, rattling bleachers and shattering glass. Screams cascaded into chaos as parents clutched their children, friends grasped for each other. What had just exploded? The crowd surged backward, panic fanning like flames. Smoke clouded the air, wrapping around the stunned audience. George's heart hammered. He could hear it pulsing in his ears, drowning out the noise. "George!" Marcus shouted, pulling him away from the confusion. The SEALs instinctively moved into formation around George, protecting him from the trembling chaos. "Stay close!" But George couldn't move. His feet felt glued to the ground. Memories flicked through his mind. Stations of grit, the weight of war, and a truth long buried in darkness. Charlotte stumbled and fell, her eyes wide with fear. "Get down!" Marcus yelled. But George was still frozen, staring at Charlotte. "George, we have to go!" Bradley yelled, urgency flooding his voice. But something shifted. An unexplainable warmth sparked inside George. An answer hid behind Charlotte's terrified eyes. A secret he never expected to surface in this moment of darkness. Just as she reached for him, the chaos swirled around them. Another rumble, this time closer. What else was going to happen? And then there it was. The shock, the recognition in Charlotte's eyes. A hint of something ominous lurking beneath her plea. The truth? What was the secret that could turn his whole world upside down? Everything he thought he knew about his life, about Langford. Was it a lie? He teetered on the brink of learning something that might change everything. What lay in the depths of the storm? A shattered world awaited beneath the smoke and confusion. And George was at the center of it all. The silence hung in the air like a heavy fog. George's heart raced. The woman's voice had pierced through the chaos, but her words only stirred deeper questions. Who was she? Did she see him? Did she know his worth? "Keep your mouth shut, lady," Langford snapped, his smile now a thin line of irritation. Bradley, one of George's old comrades, muttered, "What is she doing?" But George felt a sudden grip of hope. Who was this woman? Did she see him? Did she know his worth? "Carson Langford doesn't define dignity," she said, her voice stronger now. "You don't understand what you're talking about." Gasps floated through the stands. Children shifted in their seats. Cameras clicked on, the world outside this bubble snapping to attention. "Who are you?" Langford's voice dripped with disdain, and the shadows of his guards loomed larger. "I'm Charlotte Avery, someone who knows the truth," she declared, stepping closer. The veterans shared wary glances. They felt something stirring. Was there a fight to be had? Or was it time to retreat? But then Charlotte's gaze locked with George's. It was piercing, a connection threading through the crowded arena. You know what's hidden, George, she said, her voice now a whisper. You can break the silence. George felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. Silence? What silence? He wasn't a coward, but this wasn't the place for battles of words. Not today. Not on this stage. Enough of this nonsense, Langford snarled. His lips curled into a mocking smile. You think your words hold weight? I'm untouchable. In that moment, the ground shuddered. A sudden roar echoed through the stands, deep, thunderous. People gasped, fear flashing in their eyes. Then it happened. A loud explosion tore through the stadium, rattling bleachers and shattering glass. Screams cascaded into chaos as parents clutched their children, friends grasped for each other. What had just exploded? The crowd surged backward, panic fanning like flames. Smoke clouded the air, wrapping around the stunned audience. George's heart hammered. He could hear it pulsing in his ears, drowning out the noise. "George!" Marcus shouted, pulling him away from the confusion. The SEALs instinctively moved into formation around George, protecting him from the trembling chaos. "Stay close!" But George couldn't move. His feet felt glued to the ground. Memories flicked through his mind. Stations of grit, the weight of war, and a truth long buried in darkness. Charlotte stumbled and fell, her eyes wide with fear. "Get down!" Marcus yelled, but George was still frozen, staring at Charlotte. "George, we have to go!" Bradley yelled, urgency flooding his voice, but something shifted. An unexplainable warmth sparked inside George. An answer hid behind Charlotte's terrified eyes. A secret he never expected to surface in this moment of darkness. Just as she reached for him, the chaos swirled around them. Another rumble, this time closer. What else was going to happen? And then, there it was. The shock, the recognition in Charlotte's eyes. A hint of something ominous lurking beneath her plea. The truth? Before he could grasp the weight of it, a figure emerged from the swirling smoke. A woman with familiar features, her face taut with terror. It was their mother! The air turned electric. "Stop!" she cried, her voice breaking through the chaos. "You don't understand. George, I wasn't just protecting you. I was protecting all of us." George's heart dropped. "What do you mean?" But just then Langford's glare pierced through the debris. "You think you can hide forever? This is bigger than you." With a flick of his wrist, the ground beneath them trembled. Another explosion. The sound of shattering glass mixed with the shrieks of the crowd. George's mother fell to her knees, hands clutching at the ground. Blood trickling from a gash on her forehead. "Mom!" George shouted, rushing to her side. "I had to keep it hidden, for your own safety." "What safety?" Rage spilled from George as he gripped her arms. "What are you hiding?" "I was part of it. I helped organize everything. The secrets Langford built his empire on. If they find out..." Suddenly, a shadow loomed behind George. Langford's voice was cold, hollow. "You think you're special, but you're just pawns in a game no one can win." As Charlotte struggled to rise, fire ignited in George's chest. Everything began to unravel. Secrets woven into their family tree, traumatized by betrayal. He felt the ground shake, and a deeper truth was unfurling. "Run!" Marcus shouted, pulling them back, but George didn't move. With adrenaline surging, George turned to face Langford. No more lies, no more hiding. And in that moment, amidst the chaos, everything shifted. The stadium trembled with uncertainty. The truth was a wrecking ball, and the revelations shattered the glass of their twisted past. What else would it destroy? The storm raged on, and George stood at the center of it. Confronted with darkness he couldn't begin to comprehend. The air was thick with tension. George's heart raced in his chest, beating like a drum. The chaos swirled around him, the whisper of fear mixed with the scent of smoke. It felt like the earth was angry, trembling beneath his feet. And with every passing moment, he felt the weight of secrets looming over them, ready to pounce. "Run!" Marcus shouted again, muscles taut, eyes scanning for danger. But George stayed rooted, caught in a storm of realization. The truth hung over his head like a sword waiting to drop. And Charlotte's eyes held something he couldn't ignore, a desperation that clawed at his heart. "Mom, what did you do?" George pressed, his voice strained, urgency curling in his throat. She gasped. But then the world around them shook violently again. "George!" Marcus shouted, grabbing his arm. "We need to move!" Suddenly, a sharp crack sliced through the air. Everyone froze, breath hinged in their throats. And then, the ground erupted. A flash of light burst from the direction of Langford, who had been standing still, eyes wide in surprise. But it wasn't just a flash. It was a brilliant, blinding explosion, blue and white, swallowing the podium whole. People screamed, and a shockwave hit, knocking everyone off their feet. George's world spun. Chaos bursting into clarity as smoke billowed into the air, thick and suffocating. He rolled, trying to shield his mother. But then another sound echoed, deeper, like a groan of the earth. In the haze, he saw figures moving, the chaotic blur of bodies scrambling. But there in the cloud, amid the focused chaos, stood Charlotte. She staggered to her feet, eyes blazing with a wild fierceness that held George captive. "I'm sorry, George!" she yelled, her voice piercing the madness. "I had to. He knows the truth." "Truth?" he croaked. "What do you mean?" But before she could answer, the dust began to settle, revealing a sight that sent shivers racing through George's spine. Where once stood Langford, now lay something darker, something sinister, a twisted machine, far more massive than any man. Clanking and sputtering, gears grinding together like thunder. The crowd gasped collectively. George felt his stomach drop. The machine, pulsating like a living beast, had limbs shaking and morphing in grotesque ways. It loomed over them, a harbinger of chaos. And then, with a horrifying realization, the crowd began to scream again, a cacophony of terror. "It's him!" Someone shouted. "Langford's not dead." George's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" he yelled, shaking Marcus's arm. "What's happening?" With a thunderous roar, the machine began to peel open, and from its depths a figure emerged. Langford, but not as George knew him. His eyes glowed with a fierce brightness, cold and unrelenting, skin glistening as if engineered. He wasn't human anymore. He was transformed, a harbinger of something sinister. "Foolish children," Langford's voice boomed, resonating with an authority that shook the very ground. "You thought you could defy me? I've built more than an empire. I am the empire." Time froze, disbelief rippling through the crowd. George's heart raced again, hotter now, laced with anger. Who was this monster? A man they never truly knew. "George! He's using you! You're part of this!" Charlotte cried, eyes wide, panic cutting through her features. "What do you mean?" George felt the blood drain from his face. "How am I part of this?" But Charlotte didn't get a chance to answer, because with a swing of his metallic limb, Langford unleashed chaos. The machine jerked forward, aimed straight at George and the crowd, shifting reality into horror. "Mom! Charlotte!" George screamed, but they were lost in the surge of panic. The nightmare was beginning, and he was at its center. Everything he thought he knew about Langford, about his mother, and himself, felt like a carefully constructed lie, now crumbling into the dust, as the very ground waged war against him. "Will you be my pawn, George?" Langford's laughter echoed as everything spiraled into madness. A world unraveling before his eyes, questions thickening the air. What else lay hidden in the shadows? What truths waited to be uncovered? The answers, now obscured, twisted the very fabric of his reality. The machine roared, metal limbs flexing, glimmering under the chaos. Langford's voice boomed from within its core, distorting into something monstrous. "This is your reckoning, children. You've played your parts, and now the curtain falls." Panic erupted again. People scrambled, seeking shelter. George's heart raced. This wasn't just a battle. It was a war between shadows and light. Charlotte's eyes bore into him, wild with urgency. "We have to fight back! You can't let him win!" George felt fear grip him, but something else surged within, determination. "Together!" he said, his voice steady despite the storm unraveling. "We can stop whatever Langford is planning. We're not pawns anymore. You don't understand!" Charlotte shouted, tears streaming down her face. "He won't stop until he destroys everything. You're linked to him in ways you can't imagine." "Mom?" George turned quickly to his mother, grasping her shoulders. "What did you mean when you said you were protecting us?" She shook her head softly, breaths coming quick. "The power behind Langford, it's connected to our family. Secrets buried long ago, tied to loyalty and betrayal. Yours is the key. You need to choose your path." As Langford's machine surged forward, George saw bright flashes of red swirling towards him, laser lights crackling the air. He lunged, pulling Charlotte with him. "We'll figure this out together." Marcus and the SEALs charged ahead, forming a defensive wall against the oncoming danger. Bullets of energy streamed past them, exploding against the ground, sending debris flying. The crowd cried out, the sound of pure terror, mixed with uncertainty as people fled in every direction. The seconds turned into an eternity. George's mind raced. What if he was part of this darkness? What if everything he believed was just a web of lies? As the machine rattled, he spotted something glinting amidst the chaos, a control panel, a way to shut it down. "Over there!" he yelled, pointing. "I need to get to that panel!" "You can't go alone," Marcus shouted, but George was already moving, adrenaline pushing him forward. He sprinted between the chaos, dodging debris, running closer to the machine. "George!" Charlotte cried. But he was focused. focused on the truth, buried under layers of shadows. Reaching the panel, his hands shook as he pressed buttons at random. The machine screeched, responding, but nothing happened. Panic clawed at his insides. A loud clang echoed around him, and a shadow loomed. A metallic arm descended. Was this it? The end? But then, something unexpected happened. In the midst of his fear, he felt support. Charlotte was beside him, pushing buttons, deciphering the chaos swirling before them. "We can do this together," she urged. The lights on the panel flickered. They found the power switch, the one thing that could bring Langford's empire crashing down. With the final push, they slammed their hands down together. "Now!" George shouted, heart hammering. A pulse ran through the machine, lights dimmed, and then silence. The menacing roar quieted. The machine quivered and began to collapse inward upon itself, dragging Langford into the darkness. "No!" he thundered, his voice turning into a hiss of defeat. "You think this is the end? I'll be back!" As everything crumbled, George felt something deeper unravel. A web of doubts fell away he wasn't a pawn anymore. The truth was an icy reality that he'd confront, no matter how painful. As the dust began to settle, the crowd stirred. People looked around, unsure of what had just happened. George's hands trembled, but a sense of clarity emerged. Charlotte took a step toward him, breaths still quickened. "We survived, together." "Yeah," he said, squeezing her hand. "But this isn't over. There's more to uncover." As they stood amongst the remains of chaos, the bond formed in battle settled around them. George glanced at his mother and then at Marcus, their expressions filled with both dread and a spark of hope. They had to face whatever came next, together. The world held its breath. The storm might not be over. Questions hung in the air. What else would they uncover? And would they ever truly escape the shadows of their past? You have to subscribe now! Don't miss what happens next. This is the moment to show your support. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about this mind-blowing ending. Share this video instantly with at least 5 friends who need to see this ending. Don't wait even a second longer to share. Only true fans understand the importance of supporting the channel.